The vast majority of 10-minute presentations within BNI are absolutely awful.
Cheers for that, Darren.
Yeah, thanks, I've got mine.
Absolutely awful. There is a bit of a reason for that, though. When you're trained on MSP in BNI to do a 10 minutes, they give you a structure. And the structure they give you is not a good structure for doing a presentation. For a start, it tells you, for the first 2 minutes of your presentation, to introduce yourself. Talk about where you came from, who your spouse is, who your kids are, what your hobbies are. Maybe you're learning Italian. Picture of your dog, picture of your cat, picture of the holidays you've been on, where you went to university, where you met your spouse. Nobody cares about this stuff. No one is interested. If you meet somebody for the first time and they just talk about themselves for the opening few minutes, do you want to know more? No. Yet that's what it teaches you to do. The structure then goes on to tell you that you should spend, I think it's about 4 minutes talking about your business and your services, and about 2 minutes talking about the types of introductions and referrals that you want, and then save 2 minutes for questions at the end. Awful. Why would you save 2 minutes for questions at the end of a presentation? The vast majority of people that listen to you will remember very little of what you say. If they're going to remember everything, anything at all, it's going to be the first thing you say and the last thing you say. And if you leave the final moment of your presentation to a question somebody might ask, you can't control what they're going to say. I did a 10 minutes a couple of years ago in BNI Chester. It went all right. There was questions at the end. I had time for one question. Somebody put their hands up and said, that system you were talking about, did you get any R&D tax relief on it? Because they wanted an introduction for themselves to do R&D tax relief, thus hijacking my 10 minutes, and that is the message people were left with at the end of my 10 minutes. Oh, you could get R&D tax relief on that thing you were talking about. Not the message I wanted to convey. Which is why you should never end a presentation, in BNI or otherwise, on questions. Even if you plant the question, never end it on questions. If you want to do questions, do it in the middle. Do it at maybe minute 6 or 7, and then make sure you have the final message. And if you're going to start a presentation, don't start talking about yourself, because nobody cares about who you are or what holiday you've been on or that you're learning Italian. You need to grab their interest, grab their attention, and get them to pay attention to you. Because until they do that, they don't know you're worth listening to. And there's a few ways you can do that. You can start off by saying something inflammatory, controversial, like I did with this. The vast majority of BNI 10-minute presentations are awful. Which is awkward, because someone's about to do a 10-minute presentation. But I've had a glance at it, and he hasn't done any of these things, so I think we're okay. Or you can ask a question. Get people's engagement. But when I say ask a question, I don't mean ask an open-ended question, like, who's your favorite author? And then you'll get people thinking and talking amongst themselves and saying 15, 20 different people. I mean, ask a binary question. Yes or no. But when you do that, you have to be very clear what you want people to do. So, for example, you might say, is everybody looking forward to the lunch today?
Yes.
Yes. It's very clear I wanted you to say yes. If I were to ask a question and then maybe raise my hand and not be clear whether you wanted me to say yes or raise a hand, then you're going to get some people not sure what to do, and it's going to fall flat. But asking people to raise a hand is something quite common in a 10-minute presentation as well. There's one of the executive directors I was on DC training with yesterday. Every time he does an education slot, or an EdCo slot as they call it now, we'll start with, Who wants to earn more money? Put your hands up if you want to earn more money. And he will do that. I don't like that, to be honest with you, because I think that's a little bit cheesy. It's a little bit cliched.
That's what Mike did. I always say that.
Mike did it because Mike was on the same training yesterday. And that's exactly where he got it from.
I'll never do it again.
But if you are going to do something like that that involves a hand raise, make sure you don't do this. You have to commit.
Elon Musk.
If you go into, and don't do an Elon Musk, which I'm not going to do now for a variety of obvious reasons. But make sure you commit. But you need to get people to buy into it. Now, what about slides? Most BNI 10 minutes involve slides.
Too much work, isn't it?
Oh, I have seen some atrocious BNI 10-minute presentations. In fact, I saw one, I'm not going to name any names, I'm not even going to name, I have visited other chapters, so this isn't necessarily Chester, I'm not saying where it is, but I have seen a 10-minute presentation, the same presentation twice in the last year. Sorry, it's not you. It's coincidence I'm looking at you. It's coincidence I'm looking at you. The same presentation twice, and the whole slide was just covered with words. And the first, it was all about them. This is where they went on holiday. This is what they like to do in their spare time. This is where they met their spouse. This is where they went to university. This is where they graduated. And bang, it all went up on the slides. And then they proceed. I'm not even going to say he or she. I'm being very careful about not narrowing it down. They stood, all came up, and they began to read it, one line at a time. What had everybody done the moment it came up on the slide? Read it. So as they're going through line 2, everyone has already read it. We now have to wait 3 minutes for this person to catch up where we already are. And it's all about them anyway, so it's not that interesting. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. If you're going to use slides in your presentation, do not put reams of text up on the screen and then proceed to read it. Because you are going to bore the bejesus out of everybody watching, and it's not going to work. Use imagery as a visual aid for what you are going to talk about. Use video. Use video if you want to. There's nothing wrong with using that. If you put text on the screen, it has to be very, very small, not small visibly, very limited. And put up one line at a time as you want to talk about something, otherwise people will just read ahead. It's the same as some people print out their presentations and hand them out before the meeting. Then everyone's read it before you even get to it. What's the point in doing that? Absolutely none. And there's something you should all write down. I've announced this before when I've done talks like this. This is well worth looking at. On YouTube, there is a TEDx talk. It's not mine. There is a TEDx talk about how to avoid death by PowerPoint. And it sounds a bit flippant, but it is a fantastic TEDx talk about how to use PowerPoint for presentations, but use it as an aid rather than a crutch. And if you watch that, I think it's 18-minute or 15-minute video, every time you were about to put together a presentation, your presentations will be better, guaranteed. Guaranteed you will have better presentations. Now, what about what you do when you have a presentation on the screen? Where should you be looking?
At your audience.
At your audience? I say, I've seen some people that stand like this and do the whole presentation like that. Completely unaware there's people behind them. Not the most engaging thing in the world. And I've seen at a BNI meeting, outside our region, you're all pleased to know, where the person stood there at the screen and stared at a point at the back of the room and delivered the whole presentation looking out there. And I've seen trainers tell you to do that. Focus on a point and keep looking at it. I'm almost doing a Musk there, aren't I? Focus on a point and keep looking at it.
10 more degrees.
10 more degrees. Okay, I'm safe. I'm safe. That is not the best thing to do, because if you're looking at the screen, you've got your back to the audience. If you're looking over there, you're looking over their heads. Where should you be looking? What specifically should you do?
Eye contact.
Eye contact. Exactly. Eye contact with every single person. Don't stare them out. This isn't a fight. Certainly not with you. You're armed. But make eye contact so that they know you're engaging with them. They can't look away. They can't get on their phone. They know they can't escape. Can they, Richard? No. So they can't doze off because they know any moment now they might be drawn into the presentation. Does anybody have any questions at this point? See what I did there? No questions at this point. Fantastic. What should you do with these? Jazz hands.
One should be in your left pocket with a clicker.
One should be in your left pocket with a clicker. Is that what you call it?
The judge said that's what I'm allowed to call.
That's what you're allowed to call it. Okay?
You're using slides.
If you're using slides,
It looks seamless, and then the other hand is for jazz hands.
jazz hands. Some people, when they do 10-minute presentations, or even 60 seconds, and I've seen it, as soon as they stand up, it's mostly men, will stand up and they'll put their hands immediately into their pockets. It's not a good look, because it shows you're not that bothered about what you're doing. It's a little bit casual, a little bit, especially if you've got a clicker in that. But mostly it happens subconsciously. You don't know you're doing it. So I'm not going to say don't put your hands in your pockets, because a lot of people are not aware they're doing it. But if you are the kind of person that puts your hands in your pockets when you do a presentation, please empty your pockets first. Any keys, any change, take it out and put it on the table. Because I have seen multiple times, and this happens almost every week in our BNI chapter, somebody will stand up, put their hands immediately in their pockets and start jangling their change. And they are head height with the person sat next to them. And that person sat next to them really will not be able to hear what anyone else is saying, Paul, because all they can hear is jangle, jangle, jewelry, jewelry. Who was expecting a jangle, jangle, jewelry, jewelry reference today? No, definitely not. Now, I think perhaps the most important thing, and I'm going to finish up in a moment because we need to get the 10-minute speaker on before we do lunch. The most important thing about when you're doing a featured presentation is who you're asking for. Now, BNI will tell you to be specific, and a lot of us were specific earlier on today, and that's good. But that's only the start of it. It's all very well being specific. You also need to say why. But not why do you want to speak to that person. That's obvious. It's obvious why Paul wants to speak to landlords. It's obvious why Richard wants to speak to people with loads of money. It's obvious why Daniel wants to speak to funeral directors. Why do they want to speak to you? That's the key. Why do they want an introduction to you? That's what most people don't get. Because with the best will in the world, there are a million electricians. They're all capable of knocking walls down. Not as well as you, Dave. They're all capable of knocking walls down. There are loads of web designers out there. There are loads of financial advisors. We've got 2 in the room today. Why do people want to speak to you, not why do you want to speak to them? What can you do to help them that's different from what they're getting already? And as Andy Bounds, if anybody's following Andy Bounds on YouTube or on LinkedIn, fantastic former BNI member, as Andy Bounds says, it's always about the afters. What is the feeling or result you leave someone with after you've worked with them? That's why they want to speak with you. And then the final point is, how do I introduce you? How can somebody introduce you? What do you have to say to make an introduction? How can I start the conversation with someone to introduce you? And if you're not telling us that, it makes it very difficult to introduce you. Now, yes, you can do that in a one-to-one, but if you can get that across in a 60 seconds, you'll have nailed it. Who do you want to speak to? Why do they want to speak to you? How do I start that conversation? How do I introduce you? And that's just a few tips on how to do a better presentation. So hopefully next time, everybody's 10 minutes and everybody's 60 seconds will be flawless. Yeah?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.